Hi everyone, this is Sheng Shi, the Personal Finance Lead of Endowus. Thank you for joining us for this evening. Today we have FPL, a financial freedom expert and a personal finance blogger with us today. So we are still waiting for people to join us. Just hold on for a while, grab a drink, chill while we wait for more of the audience to join us today. Financial freedom. Okay, FPL, shall we do a bit of self-introductions while we wait for other viewers to join us?
Sure.
Yeah, so maybe you start off first.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So really thank you, Sheng Shi, for inviting me to be on this webinar. So if the people viewing don't know me, just a little bit of a background. I'm about 34 years old. I work in Singapore, and I started my financial independence journey, like working towards a financial independence in Singapore in about 2016. That was when I came out of my startup, which folded, and I felt that I was behind my peers, and I was looking at being financially unstable for a while. Then when I started getting a stable income again, I started looking around and wondering how I can grow and secure my financial future. And that was when I started looking into investing and looking into finding out more about setting myself up for retirement. But at the same time, I quickly found out about the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early. And the idea really struck a chord with me. So I started reading up on a lot of the materials online, and also reading books on the subject. And then it became something of a I became some sort of an enthusiast of the idea and really worked really hard towards it. So now is about 4 years down the line from that day. And 2 years ago, I started the blog because I was looking around online and I was looking for content that was specifically geared towards Singapore and how to FIRE here, where there's a lot more unique content to be discussed. A lot of the content online today is very US focused. So I felt that what I've learned and learned on my own, I wanted to share and also walk through my journey with the other enthusiasts or other people who are looking towards financial independence here in Singapore. So that was when I started the blog. And I don't claim to be, I wouldn't say I'm a super expert. Thank you, Sheng Shi, for saying that I'm expert, but I would say that I'm still on a learning journey. And I think everyone here, I'm hoping that I can help add more information and also make this journey explain to the rest of the people who are interested.
Okay, sure. So yeah, thank you FPL for joining us today. It's great to have people like yourself, share your views about investing, personal finance, because I think everybody have their own unique perspective, right? And I think broadly, all of us want to be, free to pursue our own dreams and passions, and being financially free is one way to help us be, to not care so much about financial constraints, but to work towards things that we are very passionate about, or even just to spend more time with our families and friends. So okay, so maybe my turn for self-introduction. I'm Sheng Shi, the Personal Finance Lead of Endowus. So a lot of my work is around content creation and working with affiliates and content partners like FPL himself and other bloggers. So that people can understand investing from different perspectives. So okay, let me just do some administrative work. If you are live with us on YouTube, do take a look at the description in the YouTube below, right? So you can see an overview of the content. We talk about the introduction to FIRE, why investing is a must for financial freedom, asset allocation, etc. Right. So this is the flow of the event. We do post any questions that you like to ask us at the right-hand side of the video. Right. We'll address it as and when appropriate. So for those of you who happen to stumble on this on Facebook Live, we also try our best to address any questions on Facebook Live. So yeah, I think we have quite a big audience already. So shall we get started?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, okay, great. So maybe, and one more administrative thing. So next week we have Budget Babe Dawn with us. So she'll be sharing with Yuning, our CEO and CFO, about investing in the lens of a parent, right? So family finances, sowing seeds for the future. So how does your personal finance and investing goals change when you are a part of a family? Do you become more risk averse, right? What about time considerations, etc.? So these are some of the topics that we will cover next week in our webinar. Okay, so let's go straight into today's topic about financial independence and early retirement. So FPL, maybe you can run us through some of the introductions around financial independence.
Sure. So for those of you that are joining the webinar, but not really sure what FIRE is all about, I want to pose a question, right, to the people who are here. If there's a machine that you could buy, right, that generates enough money to cover all of your current expenses every year, would you buy it? And how much would you pay for it, right? So think about that for a minute. If you can buy this machine that generates an income that lets you live for as long as you want on it, using your current expense, how much would you pay for that? Basically, that's what FIRE movement is all about. We're thinking about how do we generate the income, enough income to cover annual expenses for as long as we live. And at the same time, doing it much more quickly and aggressively than the traditional retirement age. When you realize that if you can do what you normally would in 30, 40 years, and you can cut it down to 10 to 20 years, so then you can spend the rest of your life after that doing whatever you feel is most important for your life. And we do this through aggressively saving, investing the funds that we have, and making meaningful lifestyle choices. Okay, we go to the next slide. And I want to address some misconceptions, right? There's a lot of misconceptions when we talk about the FIRE movement. There's a lot of people saying, oh, does it mean that you're just going to quit your job and sit around, do nothing at home? It's not about that, right? And it's not about penny pinching and living your life in depravity, right? And not ever taking vacations. It's not about preventing you from enjoying life, so to speak, right? And it's not about money. It's not about spending all day thinking about how to invest, how to make more money every day, and all you do is a money person, right? That's not the point. The point of FIRE and financial independence is to give you the ability to live the life that you love, right? And prioritizing things in your life that are important to you. What you enjoy, do more of that. And maybe some things that you don't enjoy or you don't get as much utility out of, maybe they deprioritize that and don't spend so much money on the things that don't bring you joy, right? So we're not saying don't spend money, but choose the things that you spend money on so that is most impactful for you, and save what you can and invest it towards making yourself free. And it is about giving you choice and freedom and options to do what you want to do and do what you think is important. And it's also about providing you and your family a financial security to pursue dreams and passions and ambition that may or may not make money. Like a lot of things that people do after FIRE, once they get to financial independence, a lot of people who are FIRE adherents actually have personal projects that they work on, or passion projects that they work on, which may not make any money, but they don't have to, right? So you can make choices to do things that that no longer require you to make money out of them, and that's giving you the freedom and power and strength to do what you love. Okay, go to the next slide. So to address the penny pinching part, I say that there's different flavors of FIRE, right? There's different strokes for different folks. You can choose on this spectrum however you want to live, right? So it's your choice. Do you want to be lean on the left-hand side, lean FIRE, where you're living on a minimalist lifestyle, where you don't spend on anything in discretionary, you're not taking expensive vacations, or you're all the way on the right-hand side, right? You make so much passive income that when you go to restaurants or fancy restaurants or you travel, you don't have to pay attention to price anymore. But at the end of the day, it's about setting up your finances to do that, right? To generate the enough income to feed the lifestyle that you choose. Of course, if you want to be able to spend the way that the Fat FIRE people do, you would need a lot more assets saved, and it would need longer time for you to get there, right? So it's a choice that you get to make depending on how much you want to spend, the amount of money that you need, and the amount of assets that you need invested naturally is higher, right? Next slide. So maybe a bit more background about me. The key point here is that the money itself, yes, it's the tool that gets us there, but it's not the point, right? The point is not to make the money. That's not our end objective. The end objective is what you can do with that money, and what does that money mean to the person that has it, right? So for me, in the beginning, I mentioned that in 2016, I just folded my startup. It didn't work out, and I was in a very difficult financial situation. So then I was researching about investments once I started getting a full-time job again. And for me, I feel that I was unstable financially, but at the same time, I was looking to start a family soon, right? And when I was growing up, my family, I am where I am today, and I'm very fortunate to be where I am today because my parents work really hard, right? They work very hard to make sure that I get the opportunities to study. I get the opportunities to go do things that I want to do rather than doing things that they always have to do in order to earn a living. And I'm very appreciative of that. But I also know that I, as a person that's about to start a family, that I don't want to always be worried about money and always want to spend more time with my family. And if I have children, or when I do have children, I want to spend more time with them, right? No kids ever say they wish they spent less time with their parents when they're growing up. So for me, I feel that because my family and friends, the people I love, I want to spend more time with, and without having to worry about how do I bring in the next meal, financial independence was something that really motivated me. And similar to a lot of people here, I assume, that I also have a lot of hobbies. Like I want to learn guitar. I want to do my own personal projects, like my startup. Like I started a company because I believed in it. But then a lot of times I need to think about, does this make money, right? Will this make the most money for me in the shortest amount of time so that I can eat and actually become financially stable? So a lot of decisions become very money focused. But by being FIRE, I don't have to make trade-offs between making money or follow what I think is right for the project anymore. So it's more, it's no longer driven by money, because the money itself is not that important for me anymore, because I have enough coming in every month to survive. And I also want to be able to spend more time doing philanthropy and doing things that generate more global impact. And a lot of those things, don't necessarily make money. But if I am financially independent, I don't have to, like, these things don't have to make me any money for me to do them, because it is important for me, but I don't have to care that no money is coming in. Okay. Next slide.
Yeah, so maybe FDL, let me share a bit about my own personal motivations around FIRE.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking some of the points that you shared just now, right? And I think it's something that resonates with everyone. Like if you are starting a family, you want to be with your, spend more time with your kids. And for me, I guess what financial freedom means is that you are free to pursue anything you like, right? And for me, I guess I don't really think of it as FIRE because I do naturally save and invest a lot. I think it's the way that I'm brought up. My parents are very careful with money, right? And they taught me to be very careful with money. So I naturally I save a lot. I don't spend a lot of my money, right? Then the other thing is that because I want to optimize my wealth, so I invest very aggressively. So naturally, I'm somewhat like a person chasing after FIRE, right? But the thing is that for me, being just having the assurance that your retirement is more or less on track is something that allows me to pursue my dreams. And compared to you, where you move from having your own company to have being an employee, my personal experience is that I previously worked in a Temasek Link company, and two Temasek Link companies actually, and those are very stable job. If you do your job properly, your salary is pretty much guaranteed. You'll be well taken care of by the company. So I thought that because I was financially stable, I can really pursue something that I'm very more aligned with my own interests, which is why I joined Endowers. And moving forward, I think there'll be other passion projects that I will want to work towards, and that will be something that having more money and more assurance of my retirement being taken care of will help me to pursue this kind of project. Yep. So that's my part on financial freedom.
Awesome.
Yep. So handing it back to you. Yep.
Sure. So a lot of you might be asking now, like, so how much do we need, right? What does it mean to be financially independent? How do I know? So the first thing you want to know in order to give you a direction to work towards, right, is basically have enough invested with the objective of being able to then withdraw from this portfolio every year while you're alive without running out, right? So, and the idea would be to make sure that it's also adjusting for inflation. So for example, a good example here is if you have a monthly expense of, let's say, $3,000, that means annual expense of $36,000, right? And if we're withdrawing this from your account or investment, ideally you would want to skim it off, and then over time your investment, your portfolio will continue to grow, so that as you withdraw, it actually doesn't deplete until you're no longer around, right? And there's a rule of thumb in the FIRE community, is the 4% rule, and I'll explain why it's a rule of thumb in a bit. But basically, it says that if you have, if your annual expense is 4% of your total invested assets, or basically if your invested asset is equal to 25 times your annual expense, you can count yourself financially independent. Now, the reason why it's a 4% is a rule of thumb is because it's based on a Trinity study conducted, and I think the paper came out in 1998. And it looked at time horizons of 30 years of retirement, but it looked at the market data between 1925 all the way to 1995, and looked at different 30-year periods within those years, and to determine what is the withdrawal rate, the amount of money that you can withdraw from an account to get about 95% success out of a 50% stock and 50% bond portfolio. And they found that 4% is a number, a withdrawal amount that gave them 95% success rate. Of course, it's a rule of thumb, because if you look at the time horizon, they're looking at 30 years, right? So with the FIRE mindset, we might have a retirement of 60 years. And the longer we want to retire, the lower the percentage we should be withdrawing to make sure that the account lasts that long. So from myself, my actual percentage is 3.3%. So it's actually, instead of multiply by 25, I'm multiplying it by 30 to get to my portfolio number that I need to shoot for. But this is a good guideline for you to start looking at, to plan around, right? Looking at how much do you spend today? How much would you like to spend when you're going to be retired, or when you want to be financially independent? What kind of spending would you like to have? And then multiply that by 25 to get your first indication of how much you need in order to be financially independent. So the key point is that you have to invest, right? In order to do this, your portfolio need to grow at a certain rate, so that when you withdraw your 4%, it doesn't go away after 25 years, right? So if, let's say, you don't invest and you're just withdrawing 4% every year, by 25 years, it's gone, right? So the assumption here is that your money will continue to grow while it sits there, and you're using 4% every year, okay? So if you look at the next slide, there are some simulations. So this is just to indicate where that 4% came from. So when we look at the simulation of, if you start on year 1, and they use all the different market conditions in the 30-year period to simulate where the portfolio can go as you withdraw 4%, it showed that there were, out of 120 different 30-year periods, 6 failed. So that gave us a success rate of 95. Now, what if we extend the 4% rule over 60 years? We go to the next slide. You'll see that more failed and gave us 81% success. So if you want a longer period of retirement, then you would want to make sure that your withdrawal is not as high, to make sure that the portfolio have time to recover. You don't want to go too far, because as you see, only some of the portfolio failed, right? And the rest is has astronomical amount left by the end of your 60-year retirement. If you overshoot and you go down to maybe 2%, it might be too far, and then you need a lot, way too much in your portfolio before you think of yourself as financially independent. But by the end of your retirement, you have way too much money left over. I mean, sometimes that's a good thing. You can leave that to your children, but you also don't want to spend too long working when you don't have to, right? And that's why you don't want to go overboard with the safety. So next slide will show you, if we use a 3.3% withdrawal rate, out of 90 different periods, 60-year periods, 0 failed. So you show that this is 100% success. But this is, of course, also using historical data, right? So it's no guarantee that this will continue in the future, but it's pretty good. This one includes I think the Great Depression of the US, and the financial crisis, the Asian financial crisis, and things like that is in here. So if the history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, this is a good enough, a good guideline to start with, and then start planning your finances towards that.
FPL, maybe let me just step in a bit.
Yeah.
I was just thinking maybe the other way to look at it is that, if you are comparing a 4% withdrawal rate versus a 3.3% withdrawal rate, you're actually comparing, you're actually building you're invested in the same portfolio, right? Maybe a certain 80-20 or 60-40 equities, bond mix.
Yeah.
Right? But you're actually having a bigger base for you to retire against. So you have more margin of safety, and you would therefore have a greater chance of success, which is some of the percentages that you have shown.
Correct. And if the stock market grows by the same percentage for one portfolio and the other, and your expenses don't change, right? So instead of drawing 4%, you're drawing 3.3%. The growth rate will actually make up more of your expense. right? So that it will actually cancel out your expense and make your portfolio last longer if you're withdrawing less percentage.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at some of the comments in the YouTube chat now. So Tao was saying that, what kind of investment returns would you consider sufficient in the long run? And, how does that compare with how much higher than annual inflation does it need to be? Then Jason H was also asking about how can I accelerate my retirement if I start late? So maybe you have to share a bit about what kind of investment returns you are looking at.
Sure. So for my planning, my personal expectation, I don't want to go over, I don't want to be too optimistic. A lot of FIRE blogs say maybe 12% return, right? And that's, I think, is being overly optimistic. And for myself, I use a 8% inflation adjusted return. So this is after inflation, should be about 8%. And my assumption of inflation should be average of 2%. But if you look at the historical returns of the stock market in the last 100 years, it varies slightly from different sites. But if you look at the average, there's about 9% return on the stock market, right, on the S&P 500 return. So if you look at the investments in index funds, for example, and if you diversify across markets, you might be a bit lower than that because S&P 500 has astronomical returns in the past few decades. So we do need to account for slightly lower returns. But I think 8% or 7% would be a good conservative estimate, right, for you to do some projections on and work from there. And maybe you add your own margin of safety. And my margin of safety is using my estimated expense. My estimated expense is probably more on the normal to chubby FIRE side, because I know that I want to have fun money to, go on nice trips, once or twice a year. And then I want to, go out to eat without worrying about the cost, right? Eat any restaurant and then, don't worry about the cost. So if it comes to that, hey, there is a crash and my portfolio is going down way more than I was expecting, I can cut back my expenses and then have that margin of safety and say, okay, I don't need to eat that oyster today, right? And then try to, instead of sitting at 3.3% withdrawal, maybe I try to, in hard times, I can squeeze it down to 3% and I'll still be fine, right? So it's up to individuals how comfortable you are with the risk that is involved, but the building flexibility in your financial plan, your expenses is always better. That's why I don't have the heart to do the lean FIRE way, because for me, if you're lean FIRE, you sort of, your expenses are already so lean that it's only covering bare necessities anyways. And if the market crashes way more than you expect, you might end up having to go back to work or do side incomes to try to sustain for a while. But at least you have a nest egg that supports you. You're not going to starve to death. But to each his own kind of level of risk tolerance.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, so for me, I totally agree with what you say. So it's very dependent on each individual and their risk profile, their earning capabilities. So for me, I think a 7% return is pre-inflation is good enough. I do like a 80-20 equities bond portfolio. And I do think that, like, based on, the indexes that I invest in, the type of funds that I invest in, 7% is kind of conservative estimate already, right? So, I guess for most people, if we want to be, I think we just have to get started and grow our money in a way that is meaningful, so that we have a better chance of reaching financial freedom at an earlier age.
Yeah, and also one thing that I want to mention is the allocation, right? And I think you'll touch on allocation a bit later as well. But in order to do longer time span, what was found during the research is that you should be more allocated towards equities, right? If you have too much bonds, because the bonds return is relative, like over the long term, is much lower than equity return. If you have too much bonds in your portfolio for like a 60-year retirement, you actually increase your failure rate. So if you want to have a 60-year kind of time span, you should be going up further, like 80% equities, or even, I would advise, for me personally, is that like I don't hold any bonds today. I'm 100% equities. And I think because of my time horizon, I have more than enough time span to take that risk.
Yep.
Okay, so once we get to this slide that we're showing now, is just to hammer home the need to invest, right? So if we take that same example of $900,000 that you need to have in order to meet the 4% rule, you only get that number, or it's only okay to have that number if that money is invested, right? If it's not invested and it is sitting in cash with 0% return, right, and you want to withdraw $3,000 per month and also increase it for inflation over time, right, and we assume 2% inflation, you would actually need almost $1.5 million, the bar on the left, in order to start, say that you are independent enough, financially independent, right? But if you have a investment vehicle that only matches inflation, maybe grows at the 2% rate, you will need $1,080,000, right? So by investing your money in an asset vehicle that grows more than inflation, you can afford to save less or have less before you consider yourself financially independent. Okay, so that's the first part. And next slide. So the second part of that is you also get to the number faster, right? So if you want to get to the $900,000, right? And if you save, for example, $1,000 a month to get to $900,000, I took that and then sort of map it out against the rate of return of the portfolio that you're investing in, to show how long each portfolio will reach $900,000. If you don't invest at all and you're just saving $1,000 under your mattress and wait until it gets to $900,000, you'll need 75 years. No one's going to retire at that rate, right? You're not going to retire. You're going to be almost 90, 99 years old before you say, okay, now I'm financially independent. So it's not going to be that useful for you. But if you go up to, let's say, 5% return or 7% return, you're starting to see a much more optimistic figure, right? It's 26 years or 31 years. If you start when you're 24, 25, you can be retired by the time you're 55, right? If you save $1,000 a month. Now, of course, as your career progresses, you're expected to be able to save more, right? And maybe you start off with just 100 a month. It's fine. But over time, as you get raises and things like that, you can top up that amount. And instead of using it all, you're going to be investing a portion of your raise over time. So then your horizon will get shorter and shorter as you progress in your career. Okay, so next slide. So just a very good example, right? Like a lot of people tell me, oh, the number that you're giving is so unrealistic. I'm never going to get there. Like, is it going to be even possible for me to achieve something like this? So I want to give you an example using the lean fire number. So I calculated this on one of my posts on my blog, assuming one person living bare minimally, like this is like, no extravagant travel or anything. But if you have this amount, you know that you're not going to die, right? You're not going to starve to death. You're going to have enough money coming in. So my assumption here is 1,750 a month based on some calculation I made on, living expenses, food, clothes, all the necessities. How soon can you get there, right? Is it possible? So when you look at this chart on the right, and I assume 4 different rate of returns, right? And on the left-hand side of the graph is how much you need to save a month. So if you want to retire or you want to be financially independent by 5 years, right? You start today, you want to be financially independent in 5 years for Lean Fire, you need to save more than $7,000 a month. And people are like, yeah, that's impossible. Like, I'm not going to be able to save $7,000 a month. But what if you're okay with doing it in 10 years? Now you're actually cutting it down to only $3,000 a month, right? I mean, I'm not saying that's low, but it's not 7,000, right? It's more than half the number, even though you're doubling the time it takes to retire. But if you move up to 15 years, maybe you're okay, starting here, but then you're planning to retire in 15 years, you only maximum you'll need to top up $2,000 a month, right? At 30 years, let's say you start on 25, you want to be able to retire by 55, the Lean Fire number, you only need to contribute maybe $500 a month, right? And like I said, as your career progresses, you should be able to save more, right? As you get raises or you do side hustles to increase your savings rate, that will bring down that number. You can start off with maybe you're shooting for 30 years to retire, but as you ratchet up that number, you're going to reduce the time it takes to hit that number.
Okay. FPL, maybe let me just share some views about this, because I see that there's a lot of questions about, if we start late, what happens?
Yeah.
I think this is exactly the kind of slide that you should take a look at now, right? If you're starting at 40 years old or in your late 40s because you have your family obligations or you learn about investing later, you can really check out some of this chart, right? So if you want to, if you're at your 40s and you want to retire, be financially free in 10 years, for example, right? You will be looking at numbers like $3,000 a month, saving and investing $3,000 a month at 5% return. So I think that's a question that was asked by Jason H as well as Daniel Lim. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of getting started, and definitely there will be trade-off because you start a bit later, but you still have to get started, right? And of course, as per what FPL have previously mentioned, investing is a must because you can't be getting these figures without investing.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that the 525,000 figure will be good enough for you to consider yourself completely financially independent. But like I say, it should be enough to sustain a single person, in a Lean Fire lifestyle or minimalist lifestyle. But at least it gives you that cushion, right? If something happens, there is still passive income coming in for you to then deal with whatever you need to deal with in terms of emergencies and things like that, without worrying about no money coming in. And if you already catch on, it also has a lot to do with how much can you live on, right? If you spend everything that you are taking in today, you're going to have a lot harder time getting to this point because you don't have much to invest. So one of the core tenets of FIRE is that to live below your means, right? Save the difference and invest the difference so that you can retire on it. But the higher percentage that you can save of your income, it does two things. One is you have more to invest, right? And the other one is you can live on less. And by living on less, you only need less in terms of assets to support your lifestyle. So that's, I think, where some of the misconception about like, oh, you need to penny pinch come from. But I think it's more about choosing what is most important and what you think is okay to cut down on and what you're splurging too much on versus, just giving up all nice things and like live like a monk, right? And that's not what we're saying. So, and another way to, like, I like to think about compound interest and investing, like if you have a chicken, right? Like if your current job is a chicken and every month it lays an egg or 2 eggs, right? And you eat it, you eat both eggs, right? And then you're gonna always have one chicken, right? You're gonna always have 2 eggs. And when somehow the chicken gets old and it dies, you have no more chicken, like you have no more eggs to eat. But instead of eating both eggs, you can hatch and raise that chicken, right? And over time, that chicken that you raise will lay 2 more eggs. And if you keep being patient and actually not eating all of your eggs, and raise your chicken. Over time, you'll have so many chicken that lays so much eggs that you can then live on forever. So that's more about being patient and investing your income, making your money work for you. And once the money starts working for you, the money that money starts making also makes money, right? So that's why it's the magic of compound interest.
Okay, so I think this is my part. So I'll share a bit more about asset allocation. So I think for all of us who invest, we all have to start somewhere, right? And many of my peers, actually, they do accumulate more money before they start investing. So one way they look at investing is that, if I save up $100,000, I can get my feet wet, I should start investing. And they would probably look at investing, as per this chart, in investing $10,000. And they will be very, some of them will feel that $10,000 is a big amount of money. And it is definitely a big amount of money for anybody, because we spend, it could be 2 or 3 months of your take-home salary, and you would be, if you were to lose that money, you'll feel that 2 or 3 months worth of hard work, getting scolded by your boss, all the late night OTs, getting scolded by your clients, there is always an emotional attachment towards money, right? And I think people, when they frame it that way, they are a bit more risk averse, right? They'll hold a larger portion of their portfolio in cash. So what happens is that they may try to take greater risk with their $10,000, right? They may try to time the market, they may try to stock pick, and maybe they'll be able to get 20% returns over a short period of time, right? But the thing is that this is not really meaningful investing, especially towards financial freedom, because if you were to get, even if you get a 20% return, you will only get a return of around 3.4%, right? So it's just mathematics. If you don't have more of your portfolio into riskier assets, you would definitely get an overall lower return figure, right? So the thing about the 20% return is not realistic, especially over a long period of time. That's one thing. The other thing is that it won't have a meaningful impact with investing, because it's a very small portion of your total net worth. And the last thing is that something that we have felt very acutely now is that high yield accounts, the returns are not guaranteed, or it can be revised. With the recent COVID incident, you see that the central banks, even MAS, they have been doing a lot of quantitative easings to help businesses. And what happens is that the bank interest rate drops. So bank savings now, interest rate now has revised down by another 10, 20 basis point. So again, it's very difficult to work towards meaningful financial freedom if we don't invest more of our money. So I think this is really to share to the audience. If you want to get started, you have to really work towards gradually and having a more meaningful asset allocation towards riskier assets. So on the next slide, we should also look at asset allocation with and without CPF, right? So for people like maybe for FPL, for example, or some other very aggressive investors, what they do is that they invest all of their liquid cash and SRS into the financial markets, right? 80% of it is in equities, 20% of it is in bonds, and that will roughly give you around 7% return, assuming that you get 8% and 3% for equities and bonds respectively. But if you were to include CPF, naturally the total net worth returns will be lower, because CPF, the way that it's structured is that it's more like a retirement safety net, and there's a lot of guaranteed returns given by the Singapore government, which is very generous for a AAA government guaranteed rates, right? So the thing is that even though it's attractive, the rates are high, but it will still drag down your overall net worth return. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. But if we were to move past our early 30s and we were to be in our mid 30s, like FPL, or even for myself, right, we will realize that a growing pool of our net worth will be in CPF, because we have our family obligations, cash. We will need cash for a lot of other things, like maybe we have to get a car out of necessity. We have to get pay more for our kids' tuition, etc. So a growing part of our net worth will actually be in CPF. And I think we should think of maximizing it. So if you guys are interested to know more, you can check out some of our webinars that we have, Sin Ting and I have done on investing our CPF.
Yeah, so just to jump in here, to give some of my personal experience is that my initial plan when I was planning my FIRE in Singapore is that to ignore CPF, because CPF was so far away and it's only going to be available withdrawal 55, but the CPF life starts 65, right? And I was saying, okay, I'm just going to plan, because I'm going to plan to be retired by 40. I don't care about CPF at all. I'm just, whatever that's in there, just leave it in there. And I'm just going to focus on getting to my number outside of CPF, right? But then now, or recently, when I'm looking around, reassessing the plan, and I was looking at my CPF, like Sheng-Shi said, the amount of money inside my CPF is actually about 20% of my total portfolio now. Of course, that includes the MediSave as well. But I think for the amounts that I'm not going to be basically using to buy a house, and I think I'm going to be using it to buy a house soon, the amount that is not needed to buy my house, I should try to look for ways to optimize it, right? So it is sitting there in OA for 2.5%, and maybe I can shift it into SA, but at the same time, can I get that amount invested instead in a style that I believe in, which is the index passive investing with low fees? If I can do that, then maybe that's a better choice to use my CPF money rather than having it just in there and assume that it doesn't exist until maybe 65. Then don't pay attention to it. But if you want to really optimize it, I think I'll have to, like, for me, I'm starting to seriously look into ways to optimize how to invest my CPF, and even SRS and things like that. I wrote about it on the blog, and I think there's some questions here. I think Elwin was asking why I'm invested in STI in SRS. So for me, I'm using when I was looking into SRS at the time, I think platforms that allow you to invest your SRS is still not very prevalent. At the same time, the amount of money that's inside my SRS right now only makes up a very small percentage of my portfolio. I don't think the majority of anyone's portfolio should be consisted of STI. I do think that STI does give you some safety in terms of currency fluctuation. So your investments are in SGD, so that a portion. So for me, about 10% of my total portfolio, including SRS, is in STI. And because the amount of money inside the SRS is small enough that it only makes up about 10% of my portfolio anyways, I just use the SRS as my STI portion. The rest of my outside of SRS funds are not in STI. So I hope that helped answer the question. And then I think there's some questions about, like, what do I think about VWRA compared to IWDA? And I think there's some readers that also wrote to me about this new fund that was just launched, I think, last year. I think it's not a bad choice. I think because instead of having to buy IWDA and EIMI together, with VWRA, you do get both emerging and developed markets, but you are missing out on the small cap. You are missing out on the small cap emerging market stocks for the trade of convenience, right? You get both in one. You don't need to buy two tickers. You just buy one. The other thing is that VWRA is relatively new. They're quite small in terms of size. So you are paying a bit more in the bid-ask spread, right? But over the long term, I do expect the VWRA to grow in size, and the expense ratio should come down, and at the same time, the spread should narrow, right? So if you're a buy and hold investor, VWR is a solid choice. Like it's fine. If you don't want to manage, buying two tickers and want to change your allocation based on emerging versus developed market, VWR is fine. So I think hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
Yeah, shall we move on?
Sorry.
I'm just a bit
mindful.
mindful.
Let's move on. Yeah.
I'm just a bit mindful of time. Ahead. Yeah. So I mean, okay. So if we, I think just now we briefly talked about like investing your CPF, and I just want to highlight with like a portfolio of one of my friend that is extremely aggressive when it comes to investing, right? So if you look at how this graph or how this chart look like, 65% is including CPF and SRS investment. Right, so 65% of his portfolio is in CPF and SRS investment. And for the CPF portion, sorry, so 65% is in cash and SRS investment, right? The other 35% of it is in CPF. So that friend of mine has 35% of his net worth in CPF. And his portfolio, out of that 35%, only 13% of it can be invested. So there are constraints within CPF when it comes to investment, right? So your CPF OA, 20,000 of it, you cannot invest it. Your SA, you probably don't want to invest it because there's only very safe bond options out there. And it's very hard for it to beat 4% consistently, right? And MediSave account, there's no way you can invest it. So if you look at it overall, right, there's 78% of this person's investments in the market, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? And the total net worth returns is at 6.5% because there's more weightage in the market. So I think this is something that you can consider if you want to fast track your financial freedom, right? But you have to take a plan more carefully because if you're using your CPF OA money for investing, you don't want to buy high, sell low, right? You don't want to go into a situation where you have to liquidate your CPF investments for housing or for any short-term big ticket expenses. And that is for the cash investment portion, right? So good, proper financial planning, right? Making sure that you map out your financial needs in the short term is very important for us when we try to hit financial freedom. Okay, so another point about why we should invest our CPF is that when we were to go for aim for financial freedom, we will most probably not be an employee anymore, right? So if once we hit, like for example, for FPL, if you were to reach financial freedom at 40 years old, right, he may not be wanting to be gainfully employed, or he may not want to, how should I put it? He may not want to be in a full-time job. He might be freelancing, right? He might be a volunteer. He might take on contract roles, but he may not want to. He want to have the flexibility, right? So what happens is that we should assume that we won't have any more CPF contributions from our employer and employee. But the thing is that we are missing out one of the most attractive feature about CPF if we were to aim for FIRE and we have a low CPF balance, right? CPF Life is one of the best. It is the best annuity product out there. It gives a really high return, and it insures us from longevity risk, which is we really don't want to be sleeping on the streets when we are no longer able to contribute in the job market. So the thing with CPF Life is that the amount that is given out through CPF Life, which is guaranteed low cost with decent returns, can be a huge part of our FIRE income, right? If you were to take the current FRS amount and the estimated monthly payouts, you can see that it can be a very substantial part of your FIRE income. And maybe FPL can touch a bit more on other articles when it comes to how he look at CPF Life and FIRE.
Yeah, I do have. I've looked at this, and I agree with Sheng-Shi that if you look at one of my posts on the CPF Life, it is the best in terms of annuity product that you can get in Singapore. So if you want to compare it directly between CPF Life versus something like your own investment, right? A good gauge that I use, because we're in the FIRE movement, we look at the 4% rule, right? So if you can withdraw 4% out of your investment forever, that's great, right? So if there's an investment or an asset class that is able to give you more than 4% and it never runs out, that's better, right? Like it's better than 5% is better than 4%. But CPF Life, when you look at starting from all of them, I think if you look at the amount of money that you actually put in to get the payout, it's, if you calculate it, it comes out to almost 9% across the board, right? So you're getting 9% every year out of your CPF Life compared to what you've put in adjusted for inflation already. So if, like, for me, if I have a choice between going to just FRS and investing the difference, or I top up the amount into ERS to get the additional payout, I would rather put the money into CPF Life because it gives much better and returns with a lot lower risk, right? Of course, this is assuming that there's no policy change. There is policy risk in terms of like whether the Singapore government will continue paying this rate. Would it continue paying starting at 65? You know, maybe they'll move it up to 70 or 75, right? Later, now that life expectancy is increasing. So there is a risk of that. But I think if the government decides to do that, it's not going to be very popular. So there's a bit of risk there that you have to take if you're going to go with the CPF Life. But I think if you are okay with that, CPF Life is one of the best vehicles. And most likely, it's not going to pay for all of your retirement needs. It's only going to make up the fixed income portion, right? And here you're seeing that it's only, even at ERS, Enhanced Retirement Sum, you're only getting $2,000 a month, right? And most likely you want more, but at least this forms a floor, right? The rest can be made up with your portfolio. But, you know, if push come to shove, you always can rely on the ERS CPF Life income to sustain your minimum, like your bare minimum living expenses.
Yep. So yeah, maybe to share a bit more about investing your CPF, since you're at this topic. So I think investing in your CPF has to be done in a very measured, meaningful way. So I guess even for myself, when I first started, you know, because I was a spreadsheet junkie from my work, right? So I was a private equity, real estate private equity analyst, and, you know, I sort of helped my investors project how their investment returns will be like. So naturally, what I did was to project how my wealth will be like and how my CPF, cash, and SRS will turn out based on certain assumptions about my income growth, as well as my bonuses, etc. Right? So I realized that my CPF balance will be huge, and working in CapitaLand, working in Keppel, there was no way I really didn't like having further home buyers in my investment, right? Because I'm already working in a very Singapore company. I really don't want to expose my investments more into STI products, right? So I really wanted to invest globally, but at that point of time, there was no good global solutions out there. So, you know, if we want to have greater assurance that we can hit our retirement goals, right, get a 6 or 7% index returns, then investing in the global market is the best way to do it. And, you know, Endowus, we have brought in the two Infinity Vanguard funds that helps create a very diversified passive portfolio, right, that is trying to mirror the MSCI All Country World Index, right? So there's a better chance of returns because we are more diversified, and we are diversified in a meaningful way, low cost, meaningful way. Of course, investing, there is a risk of doing poorer than the 2.5%, and the 2.5% is great. So if you were to look at this chart here, between 1990 and 1996, you would have done more poorly than your peers who have not invested their CPF, right? And you would probably feel very sore about it. And that's actually what I felt when, you know, the recent market crash. So I invested in November with Endowus when the markets were at a high. And what happened is that, you know, in February this year, the market crashed. But the thing is that because we are investing through CPF over a long period of time, there is a greater chance for us to succeed. because over the long run, I think FPL will talk about it more later. We should be able to do better than the 2.5% because we are putting our money at work in the market. So FPL, I'm going to hand it back to you about index investing.
Sure. Do you want to stop for questions, or do we might not have time? So we should probably.
I think we just go ahead. I think we have been talking. We have been answering quite a few questions. Maybe let's go ahead.
Okay. Let's go ahead first, and then if we have time at the end, we might take questions. In that case, so in the FIRE community, or when you're reading FIRE related content or financial independence related content, a lot of the content will be around the investing in broad-based index funds, right? Buying as much as of the global companies as possible. And a lot of people might be skeptical, and I used to be as well. It's like, I don't understand why this is a recommendation and why does it work, right? Like everyone says you should do it, so it makes sense to follow the people who know more than you. So, but then for me, it wasn't really enough. Like I needed to make good sense of that to myself so that I can believe in the power of it as the market goes up and down, right? Because there will be inevitably there will be crashes, right? And if I don't believe in the method of investing enough, I might sell, right? I might sell when the market does badly and then lock in the losses. So I wanted to understand this fundamentally and grasp it intuitively to get that knowledge to stay the course, right? So maybe this is the way that I've rationalized it. And I think it's something that might be helpful for all of you to understand why it works. Why does index investing works for long-term investing, right? So the very first point is that when you buy a share, and a lot of people don't think about this as much, is that when you buy a share, it's not just a piece of paper, right? You now are a part owner of a living, breathing business that generate real value, right? You're generating products and services that other people actually pay money for. And all of this is what you own when you buy a share. Next slide. And when you have a company, in order for companies to do well, they need to hire great employees and great people that works for that company to outcompete other companies in the market, right? So when you buy a share of Apple, you're a part owner of Apple, and at the same time you have, align your interests with Tim Cook, obviously, and Tim Cook works sort of for you, right? Wouldn't it be nice to have people like that working for you? And good companies that have great employees will beat out the bad ones, right? And if you own the good companies like that, and you're hoping that they will outcompete and beat the other companies that don't have as good of an employee. Now, next. But at the same time, it's very hard to predict which companies in the market today will succeed over the long term. And when we say long term, it's like 30, 60 years, right? The time horizon of our retirement. Because the majority of the reasons, or a lot of the reasons why companies fail, is not controllable by themselves. And even the employees within the companies don't know, let alone the Wall Street analysts, right? If you go online and you look for analyst commentary on a particular company, you will see predictions both up and down. It's going to die tomorrow, or it's going to be going to the moon, right? But a lot of the reasons why companies go bankrupt or die, a lot of it is not according to controllable by them. So case in point, right now, a lot of companies are dying because of COVID-19. And which company can control COVID-19, right? So you have global events, economic events, paradigm shifts, innovations by other companies that render your whole industry irrelevant, right? So digital camera replaced film camera. The film camera company is now dead, right? Kodak died, not because they didn't make great film cameras, but they just didn't see the innovation coming that makes their entire expertise obsolete. Next one. So maybe you say, hey, why not just buy great companies, right? Look for good companies and just buy them, and then you'll win. Hold it for 30 years, 60 years, you're never gonna lose. But that's not going to always be true, right? Because good companies or companies that look good today may go out of business tomorrow. And I don't have to explain all of the logos on here, but they used to be great companies. People love them until they're not good anymore and they die, right? So if you hold one of these companies and then you just leave it there for 30 years, you wake up one day, they're sort of gone to zero, right? Or close to it. Or maybe we avoid the bad ones. Go to the next slide. But if we try to avoid the bad ones or companies that don't do well, some of these bad companies might be tomorrow's turnaround story, right? The new kid on the block can also grow massively and outcompete the incumbent good companies. So if you look at Apple, they were about to go out of business in 1990 or 1995. But once Steve Jobs come in, they're now one of the biggest companies in the world. Who would have predicted that at that time? Everyone at that time thought that Apple was going to die, right? Same thing with Microsoft. People kept talking about how Microsoft is about to die because they're not innovating anymore. They're just using their cash cow. But now they've turned it around. They managed to find their groove back and is one of the biggest companies back again, right? Tesla is a bit more questionable, right? Like today, it could be like $850, but then maybe one tweet comes in from Elon and then is now, $500. You never know, right? It could be good, it could be bad. You can't predict, and especially if it's controlled so much of the sentiment is surrounding one individual in the company. Anything can happen, right? It's very difficult to predict which one's going to do well. Next slide. So what I'm trying to say is it's not really possible to pick the winners and avoid the losers, right? So we're not Doctor Strange. We can't predict the future. And we are not able to say which company I just buy now, wait 60 years, it's gonna make me a billionaire, right? So instead of that, what do we do? Next slide. So instead of beating the casino, trying to beat the casino by picking and choosing individual companies and numbers that you think is like lucky number or a really good company today, and to beat the market, instead of doing that, what if I tell you you can buy the entire casino, right? You just buy all of the companies, and when you do that, you will guarantee it over the long term to make money, right? Make returns. Next. And the reason why that works is because when you buy everything, the market itself comprises of bad performers, right? Good performers and average performers is a bell curve, right? But bad companies, if they continue to do badly enough, they will go bankrupt, let's say, right? They lose 100% of their value, go to zero, right? But once they do that, they get removed from the index, they get removed from the market. But for companies that are brand new or companies that are small, they can grow 30 times, 100 times. There's no limit, maybe 40 times, 1,000 times, right? And because of that, as new companies come in or good companies grow, there is an upside bias when you own the entire block. Next. And if maybe it feels counterintuitive for you, right? When you, let's say if you own all of it, if I own all of the companies and they compete with each other and then one win, one lose, won't owning all of the companies mean we're not going to make any money because one goes up, one comes down, and then net is all zero, right? But that's not true because the global market and the global economy is not a zero-sum game. And if you look at the chart, right, you can see that, yes, there are jagged lines and sometimes it goes down. But in general, the long-term trend over the last 100 years is that the stock market is going up over time. And why is that, right? Next slide. The reason, the main reason of this is productivity growth, right? By owning the whole pie, the global economy actually grows over time. It doesn't stay in one size, right? Population size increases, humans innovate and companies innovate. We create more and more value on top of innovations, right? And less effort is required to produce more value over time. This accelerates. So you imagine farming. Hundreds of years ago, the majority of the population of the world is doing farming in order to make enough food to feed the population. But today, because of all the innovation, only a few people need to, a small fraction of the world need to do farming in order to feed everyone. There's another abundance of food, right? Imagine doing all of agriculture by hand. It doesn't work, or you need thousands of people to harvest the field, right? And that's what was done 100 years ago, right? But now only one person is needed, or only a handful of people is needed. And but with this productivity growth, increases the size of your economy and creates more value over time, and increases the transactions and the number of people that are getting value out of the economy. Next. So by diversifying and you're buying the entire pie, you're betting that the productivity growth of the human ingenuity continues far into the future, right? It's a bet on progress, and it's a bet on humanity as a whole and our ingenuity to continue to innovate and continue to grow as a society over time. And as we grow, the more innovation comes in, and it should be accelerating over time. And that's why when you look at S&P 500 charts or stock market charts, the long-term trend looks like an exponential curve, right? And that's where your productivity is being, your productivity growth is manifesting itself. Next. But I want to caution that crashes will still happen, right? Market disruption will still happen. So sometimes market will get overly optimistic, like the dot-com bubble, housing bubble, and then usually when there's a crash, the market is overly pessimistic, right? People will sell everything, also no value. So then I'm just gonna sell everything, cut my losses, and they do it too much. So then the market goes down way too far relative to its actual value. And some of the things are not predictable, right? That causes crashes, right? For example, COVID-19, it's causing a lot of a big crash now because it wasn't predicted, and people are scared that it's going to cause a major global catastrophe, right? And by definition, the bear markets are not predictable, right? Because if it is predictable, then it would have been foreseen, and then it would be priced in. Like no one would be panicking if they knew that there's a pandemic coming, because then it would already, the price drop would have happened before the pandemic arrived. So bear markets by definition is not predictable. So you just need to expect it, that there will be a crash, but you just don't know when and where it's coming from. But by believing that human ingenuity and productivity growth continues into the future, this crisis will pass, and over time, the global economy will recover. Now, it doesn't work if you're betting on individual companies, because individual companies can go bankrupt, right? You can bet on specific companies, and then COVID-19 happens, that company's dead, right? Or you bet on a particular country, and that country goes into a world war, right? And then they lose the world war, or whatever war that they fought in, that country never recovers. And all of the companies that are in that country will have a tough time. So you don't want to be too narrowly focused in a particular country, or even an industry sector, because an industry sector, as you see, oil used to be good, and then now there's a global issue that caused it to be down, but then you never know when it's going to come back up. Will green energy disrupt it forever, right? Like, would oil ever come back up, and how long would it take to come back up? So betting on industries, betting on countries and different specific companies is not a good, it is not guaranteed to give you this long-term benefit. So this also gives you an idea that you definitely need to make sure that you have when you're investing, you're not investing all of the money that you have, right? You need to have emergency fund. You need to have a saving that allows you to continue living even through a crisis. You don't want to be one of those people that have all the money in the stock market and it crashes, and then you need that money to live on. Therefore, you're forced to sell. And when you're forced to sell in a crisis, you're locking in the loss, and you don't have the staying power to hold through the crisis, even though you know it's going to come back up, right? That's why you should not invest money that you will need in the next year or 5 years. And you don't want to invest your emergency fund so that you can stay the course and you're not being forced to take a loss because your timing was just not good, right? And you just invested in right before the COVID-19 crash, and now you need it to eat. Now you need to sell it at half the price or 30%, 70% of the price, and eat the loss. And that's not what you want. So expect crashes, but that's why in the FIRE community we believe in broad-based index funds.
Yeah,
and I hand it back over to you, Xingqi.
Yeah, so maybe let me just, sorry, because I was just shifting around. I lost a bit of the concept.
No worries, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there are some like related questions on this. So I think Kai Le Heng was sharing that, I don't understand why familiarity breeds contempt, because isn't it easier to reach your financial goal by sticking to SG since you're more intimately familiar with how and also how to maneuver around the market? Actually, it can work both ways, right? So most of my, to be very fair, most of my peers who are working in listed companies, they actually feel like what Kyler has pointed out. There's a sense of familiarity, right? And you want to invest in the companies that you know of, or your competitors that you know of, you have insights of.
Yeah.
But the thing is that another way to look at it is that because you have worked in these companies, you know a lot more of what's going behind the scene, right? And because you have that kind of information, you have a greater sense of fear, because retail investors really don't know anything about the stocks that they are stock picking. And that is the conclusion that I have, working with based on my own experience, or looking at some of the senior management that I work with, and looking at how they stock pick. There is always that confirmation bias when it goes to investing in companies that you are familiar with, right? You just zone in and tunnel vision on the things that you have that confirms whatever decision that you want to make, and you just ignore whatever else that you want to do. Whatever other information or evidence that points the other way. So there is always that risk, because we are human beings, and investing is more of an art than a science, right? So for me, I rather leave it. I rather not be part of the decision-making process. I love growing money, but I don't like the process of growing money through stock picking and actively investing. So I mean, I'm very happy with that 7 or 8% returns that indexing should be able to give me, because I'm investing in big global companies. So I don't try to stock pick, right? And especially from the some of the points that are pointed out, should I invest in Sci-Fleet Plus? Should I invest in dividend yielding companies? My answer would be no, also because the concentration risk is there, right? Because when you are for certain type of companies will be able to give out dividends. And these are, especially in the Singapore context, right? We want to be receiving dividends or income that are Sing dollar denominated. Right. And if you since people who have that kind of mindset, they would be investing in, Eagle Hospitality Trust, of course, the Capital Mall Trust, which is very extremely blue chip, Lippo Malls, Singtel, M1 StarHub, SMRT, and Singpost. These are companies that have done well in the past, or were projected to do well, as with the case of Eagle Hospitality Trust. But in the end, there's still a lot of concentration risk based on the industry that they are in, right? So for the telcos, all of us know that they have suffered greatly because of the MVNO, opening up more licenses by the government. So these are really risks that we shouldn't subject our financial freedom plans to. So for me, investing in a meaningful, diversified way is something that will help me with my financial goals, I feel, rather than just concentrating on stock picking and choosing Singapore assets, which inevitably will expose us to very certain type of industries and certain type of companies.
Yeah, I agree completely. And from a perspective of dividend income or dividend investing, I don't focus on dividend, and I still advise. I still say that we should invest in a broad market, and don't focus much on dividend. And the main thing that you mentioned already is the concentration, right? The dividend paying companies tend to be in different, like, specific sectors that allow them to pay a lot of dividends, right? Like, so REITs or energy companies, but they're sort of focused on very specific industries. And for me, I'm looking at total returns, right? I don't care if the return is given by dividend or it is given by growth, right? If my growth, and the thing is, when dividends are paid out, usually when the dividend is paid out, the stock value drops by the exact same amount, right? So it might be nice for the dividend investor to receive a money coming in passively without them having to sell. But at the end of the day, in terms of returns, dividend income versus growth income is the same. I just need to sell my stock to get to capture the returns that the growth company provides. And companies that can pay dividend are companies that don't need the money to reinvest. So a lot of the companies that pay dividend are not really high growth companies, right? So they're not doing a lot of innovation. And the dividend can also stop. If these companies face a crisis, they're not guaranteed to pay a dividend anymore, right? So in the end of the day, yeah, like for simplifying the investments, I don't think it's worth it to do the research. And empirically, it's not really shown in the data that dividend investing outperforms in terms of total returns than just a normal index investing.
Yeah, so I think it's also back to the point about when I guess a lot of time when we choose to receive dividend, we assume that there's a transaction cost when it comes to selling our assets, right? So definitely execution matters. Choosing a platform that is low cost in terms of not having a very high brokerage fees or even having no brokerage fee is something that we should consider. I think that's pretty much implied. And so FPL and I, we both use very low cost platform for our investments. Yep. So on that, I think maybe just to wrap things up, let me just do the wrapping up, right? So financial independence is a journey that all of us should embark on. We should find our own pace, find our own motivation. So I think FPL shared some pretty great charts about how we can look at the different stages of life and how we can look at how much we need to stay based on starting at different stages of life that we start our FIRE at. So if you want to take a look at our webinar again, do rewind and look through some of the content. Right. So for us to reach FIRE earlier, we need to put money at work earlier. So there's no way around it. So we can also try to grow our CPF money in a more measured and deliberate way, so that we are able to make use of CPF Life and be able to retire well with guaranteed income from CPF Life. So meaningful diversification through index investing works well for the FIRE, because we really want to have greater assurance that we are not getting ourselves into concentration risk of companies. We are not exposing ourselves to certain type of geographies, especially for Singapore investors. So just to share a bit more about Endowus, we focus on the three key parts of pillars of good investing: access, advice, and cost. So access meaning to say institutional share class and exclusive access to fund products that are that will be meaningful for your retirement. So for especially for CPF, we are the only platform that allows passive S&P 500 and a global stock index fund through us. This is done through us only, right? And for advice, we structure your portfolio in a very meaningful, strategic way that doesn't try to over allocate or under allocate certain sectors based on economic data. So we don't do market timing. I think that's one of the questions that is asked, how are we different from the other robos? So we believe in strategic asset allocation, meaning to say you do an 80-20 portfolio in a very transparent, straightforward way so that you don't try to time the market based on asset allocation. Right? So of course we are low cost as well. We don't, unlike typical platforms like the insurance agents or financial advisors, we don't have any sales charges. There's no transaction fees. We rebate all trailer fees that we receive back to our clients for the CPF portfolio. So, and of course, we care a lot about currency efficiency as well as tax efficiency. So we only use Irish domiciled funds or similarly tax efficient funds so that we don't pay any additional dividend withholding tax or exit tax that you might be paying if you are investing through US ETFs. So that's all. I think shall we move on to the Q&A? So there are still some questions that have been asked. Yeah. So okay, I'm just looking at some of the questions.
Yeah, so I see one question where I think Trigger 13 is asking why not try to follow Warren Buffett's strategy of picking undervalued companies with strong management to generate above average returns. I think that's a good question. The reason I think this can be highlighted and can be thought of in this way, right? Like I think what I shared previously, that there's so many, the market is basically multiple participants trying to finding that price. I think if you talk about it, I think Greg would love talking about this, about people are competing to find with the right price of a particular company, right? And you're essentially in a market competing with all the professional investors, all the non-professional investors looking around and trying to find undervalued companies. So it is very, very unlikely for us as retail investors to understand which companies are actually undervalued, right? And if it's already undervalued, has it been priced in? Has it been priced in by all of the people investing in that company already, right? We are trying to outsmart the market, and by just reading Warren Buffett's strategy, and you think that we would be able to replicate that strategy, is not going to be possible, right? Like millions of people are reading the Warren Buffett strategy, but then why are there not a million Warren Buffett, right? So I don't believe that we are able to outsmart the market and pick the right company, even though there are outliers, right? There are people like Warren Buffett that's able to do it on a consistent basis. But when you look at even the professional portfolio managers over time, the actively managed funds over 10 years, I think only 14% of the actively managed funds managed to outperform the market. And that's only looking at the actively managed fund that managed to survive the 10 years, right? So if you look at all of the actively managed funds, it's even smaller, because a lot of the actively managed funds, if they don't do well, they just fold. So then you skew the statistic. And if the professional managers who are paid to spend all day trying to look for companies that will outperform can't do it, is not going to be possible for us who don't even have that kind of resources to predict the same.
Yeah, so on this point, maybe FTR, let me just jump in. I guess the next question, the viewers might ask is that if active investing is so bad, like why would you Endowus use Dimensional as a fund manager? So I mean, just to give a very short brief about dimensional funds. So they were started in 1981 by Eugene Fama and Kenneth French, and they have a very long track record with investing. And the thing is that they are very systematically investing in a very broad, globally diverse, broad portfolio, right? That overweighs proven factors, research proven factors such as profitability, small caps, as well as value. So they are not really taking bets on how certain companies will do better, but they have come up with a way to very systematically invest in factors that have been proven to do well long term. And the thing is that these factors have to be invested over a very long period of time to realize those returns. And I think that there are some concerns about short-term dimensional funds that doesn't seem to be performing well against the index that's benchmarked with. And these are valid concerns because large cap growth company has been doing so well. But I think how dimensional is very aligned with our investment value is that they are always looking to lower their expense their fund management costs, and they are also very diversified and systematic in the way they are investing, which is why we choose to use dimensional fund for cash and SRS. And when there are no, when dimensional is not an investable option, then we are more than happy to look at passive investing instruments such as the Vanguard Infinity S&P 500, as well as the Vanguard Global Stock Index Fund to put inside our CPF portfolio. Yep. Okay, let me see if there's any other questions that we have not addressed. I think that's all, right? FPL, is there anything else that you want to share with our viewers?
I think that looks like it. I think just the last thing I want to mention is that I'm really glad to be able to come here and share my journey and experience and what I've learned with all the people that tune in for the webinar. There's a lot more to be discussed, actually. What we just discussed is just scratching the surface. But unfortunately, we don't have all the time that we need to go into all the different interesting topics around this. So if you guys are interested, you can go check out my blog. And at the same time, if you have any questions or any additional things you want to know, just shoot me an email. The email is lion@firepathlion.com. And yeah, I'll be happy to answer any burning questions. And also, if you have any concerns or questions or any confusions that you might have. So yeah, hopefully we have more time and other platforms or forums to discuss more about FIRE. So yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, Sheng-Shi.
Thank you, FPL. Yeah, so maybe just last administrative messages, and yeah, so do sign up below in the link below for our next event with Budget Babe. And also we have also shared some articles from FPL as well as from myself. And do hit the like button and subscribe to us if you like our content. We'll be doing weekly webinars, and we also post videos once in a while. Okay, thank you so much. And have a great evening ahead, guys. Catch up again. Bye.